Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos a mais um webinar que celebra Julho, o mês de inovação. Hoje é dedicado a um olhar global sobre a inovação no setor público. Este olhar global implica que temos convidados de vários pontos do mundo, que implica também diferentes fusos horários. E implica que esta sessão também irá decorrer em inglês, pelo que, infelizmente, vou ter, a partir de agora, falar também em inglês, ok? Portanto, assim, good morning and welcome everyone. As I said before in Portuguese, today we'll have a busy agenda with guests from different points of the world that came to share their perspectives about innovation in public sector. And so, as we have a busy agenda and with no more delays, I would like to invite the Minister for the Modernization of State and Public Administration, Alexandre Leitão, to open our session. So thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. Minister, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, bom dia. Thank you all for coming. Senhora Secretária de Estado, cara Fátima, Senhor Presidente do Conselho Diretivo da AMA, Senhor Professor Ricardo Paz Mamed, também agora passarei a falar em inglês. Dear speakers, Mr. Brenton Caffin, Mrs. Elsa Pelichowski, Mr. Fernando Pablo Martim, Mr. João Vasconcelos, Mr. Vitor Fazio. Innovation always involves making a break with the past and stepping out of our comfort zone. It's always about doing things differently than we've always done. As Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. In public administration, innovation results from the need to improve existing responses, but also to adapt the traditional functioning of public structures and services to the needs of a society in constant change. Openness, transparency, simplification, participation, and new design solutions are the main ingredients of innovation. Digital technology boosts the transformation in public services, but it is also necessary to develop new skills, lead in a different way, and create environments of experimentation. All over the world, innovation in public administration is being discussed and developed in the most diverse forms and circumstances. Being aware of this global challenge is an important part of the mobilization to increase the capacity to innovate. With the following speakers' interventions on innovation, we complete the three dimensions of administrative modernization after having explored the themes of participation and simplification. Therefore, I thank you all for your presence and the diversity of approaches that you will bring to this discussion, allowing us to achieve this global vision, but at the same time, complementing what is being done to innovate in the public sector in various geographies in response to global and local challenges that countries are now facing. Because of the pandemic experience, the need for this capacity became more evident. Innovation must be permanently and constantly renewed in the face of changing realities, unexpected circumstances, and needs that are also differentiated depending on the contexts as a keystone for recovery and resilience, ensuring better services to citizens and businesses, and therefore better policies to deal with complexity and uncertainty. It's the ability to innovate that distinguishes organizations and services in the face of adversity, and it is also what drives the value that administrations have to the services that they daily deliver to society. To create an environment that fosters innovation, it is necessary to create the right conditions. We need knowledge, skills, and technology, not forgetting the dimensions of management. It was with this comprehensive approach that we've elaborated our strategy for innovation and modernization of the state and public administration 2020 to 2023. Allow me to give you some examples of the projects that we have been working on that are drivers of innovation in public administration in Portugal. CGEP, which is a system of incentives that, across the board, stimulates innovation in public administration in 3 areas: training, experimentation, and recognition through awards. The second edition is now in application process. We also have LabX at AMA, our public institute for promoting and developing administrative modernization, which over the past 3 years has brought citizens' experimentation and experience to the center of public services design. And Simplex itself, although associated with a strong simplification component, turns out to be one of the most recognized aspects of innovation in Portuguese public administration for the past 15 years. The real innovation is the one that allows us to face the future, and that is what public administration has been doing. And lately, with the pandemic situation, we had to adapt to a very different situation that it was really challenging to public administrations all over the world. In closing, I would like to thank all the speakers again for their participation, and I'm looking forward to this session that will be very useful to all of us. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Sra. Ministra. Thank you very much for these opening remarks, and more than that, for all the support that you are giving to bring innovation to the front line of public administration here in Portugal. So, moving on. To continue to inspire us, we have as a guest the Professor Ricardo Paes Mamed, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Economy at ISCTE, o Instituto Universitário de Lisboa, where he has been teaching since 1999 in areas such as European economy and integration, sectoral economy, and innovation, besides being a member of Dynamia, the research center on socioeconomic change and territory. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. It's a pleasure and an honor to participate in a session with such a distinguished panel of experts in innovation in the public sector. Long before I started paying close attention to the public administration, I was trained as an economist, and as a student of economics, I was taught to look at innovation as essentially an endogenous feature of market competition. And according to this view, innovation is something that deals with firms, and firms innovate in order to survive and grow. Firms adopt new production processes to achieve lower average costs. They introduce new or improved products to differentiate their offer from those of competitors. They develop new marketing and distribution strategies to target market niches that are underexplored, where they hope to get higher margins. So innovation in this view is pretty much a matter of surviving within market forces and outperforming your competitors in the market mechanism. The question here, when we're talking about innovation in public sector, is how does this view help us in understanding innovation in the realm of government? If we think about it, usually public agencies don't have direct competitors. Some of them do, but most of them don't. Most of them are not fighting to survive as institutions. Again, a few of them might be still fighting for survival, but most of them have their survival guaranteed. Public agencies are not seeking higher profits. They are not seeking higher profit margins. They are not seeking larger markets. I would dare to say that many of them would wish not to extend too much their targets, the public to which they have to provide their services. So why should they innovate at all? I mean, if they don't have this kind of market incentive to innovate, the question is, why should the public sector, public agencies innovate at all? And I can think of 4 possible answers to this question. The first one is, well, they don't. Public agencies simply don't innovate. Well, this answer is false. So it's not very interesting for the purpose of our discussion today, but in any case, I will come back to it in a moment. The second answer to our question on why should public agencies innovate is probably the favorite answer given by most economists and by many political scientists. This goes to say that public agencies do in fact innovate, but not because their survival is at risk. Still, they innovate because there are some material incentives in it. So we can think of the idea that managers, public managers, will have some egoistic motives to outperform. For example, they want to have more power, or they want to increase their chances to get higher positions in the future. So it's all about incentives. That's how the second answer would go. But there is still a third possible answer to the question of why the public agencies innovate. This, I would say, it's less fashionable, but it's not less important. This third answer would be that public agencies innovate because those who work in them believe that they should. We can call it a sense of duty, we can call it professional pride, or something similar. The idea is that for some strange reason, or at least some might consider it a strange reason, many civil servants and public managers assume that their mission is to contribute to the general well-being of the population. And thereby, they would promote innovation because they believe that new public services, new forms of interacting with the public, new and more efficient internal procedures are a contribution, or can be an important contribution to the general well-being of the society they are willing to serve. There is still a fourth possibility, which is probably not as honorable as this one, but I would also say that it's not unimportant, which is the idea that public agencies very often innovate just because they are desperate. They lack the people, they lack the financial resources, they lack the attention they need from decision makers to solve many of the problems they face when performing their everyday duties. So, in some sense, they are forced to find ways out of their constraints, and occasionally, often by accident, by doing that, they innovate. In fact, I think that it's not difficult to conclude that all of those 4 answers to the question, why do public agencies innovate, all of them are true to some extent. And I would suggest that all of them should be kept in mind. So public agencies do innovate, but probably not as much as we would like them to. Civil servants and public managers do have some material incentives to promote innovation, and they do react to those incentives. So we should not ignore the relevance of material incentives. Not least, most civil servants and public managers are guided by a sense of duty, and many see innovation in public services as part of their mission. So again, we should probably not ignore this willingness of civil servants and public managers to do as much as they can, regardless of their direct interests, personal interests. They do invest in trying to improve the services they are responsible for. And of course, nowadays we very often notice that many public agencies do end up innovating out of despair as a result of the dismal conditions they face to perform their job. We know that the factors behind the need for public sector innovation abound nowadays. There is an increasing complexity of the social problems governments have to address, and these often require new approaches and solutions. We know there is a continuous pressure in virtually all countries in the world, a continuous pressure on public finances, and this forces public agencies to do more with less resources. And there is also never rising expectation of the public regarding the quality and the efficiency of the public services. And these rising expectations, they may be a result from higher levels of education, of higher exposure to the possibilities granted by new technologies, among other factors. So in any case, we know that public agencies are being are under pressure by many factors to innovate on a daily basis out there. To address these trends and challenges, public agencies need to innovate. The question, which I think is a central question for today's seminar, is how can this be achieved? And there is by now enough literature to guide us in some usual answers to how can we make the public sector more innovative. And this goes through skills, to incentives, to organizational practices, through political leadership. And again, all these factors are indeed relevant for enhancing innovation in the public sector. We know that governments have to invest in civil servants and public managers' technological and technical skills so they can better identify the opportunities for innovation and implement them. Policymakers and public managers must include innovation as a criterion for assessing the performance of individuals and organizations. Public agencies may gain from adopting organizational practices that foster new ideas, that foster experimentation, that foster testing. And as many of the relevant changes in the public sector, the evolution towards an innovation-driven government, of course, will largely depend on the political commitment at the highest levels of government. This, I would say, is the common sense about these topics on how to enhance innovation in the public sector. There is, however, another determinant of public sector innovation that goes beyond skills, incentives, organizational practices, and political leadership, or maybe I should say that involves all these elements, and this has to do with the prevailing prejudices about what the public sector can and cannot do. In the last decades, there has been a more or less deliberate tendency to picture civil servants and the public sector as a whole as being inefficient, bureaucratic, and conservative in many senses. The problem with this view is not only that it is to a large extent false. The main problem is that by insisting on it, this prejudice risks becoming true. In fact, let me put it bluntly, bashing the public sector is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because policymakers very often assume that the public sector is incapable of fostering innovation, they will end up favoring the outsourcing of crucial activities, thereby devoting public agencies from opportunities for stimulating changes, for testing new solutions. Outsourcing also leads to the erosion of institutional memory, without which the capacity to learn from past experiences is lost. As more exciting challenges are commissioned to private firms, civil servants are invited to think that it is not their role to trigger changes in what public agencies do and how they do it. And the lack of interesting challenges in turn, the idea that civil servants are not expected to deal internally with such challenges makes it harder to attract bright and creative young people to the public service. And finally, the loss of innovative drive helps to legitimate the investment in the capabilities and the stagnation of real wages and also the opportunities for career development in the public sector. In the history of modern states, and I'm arriving to the end of my presentation, in the history of modern states, examples abound in which public sector has played a decisive role in promoting change. This happened in technology, in health, in education, in protecting the environment, and in many other fields. The insistence on the false idea that public sector to play such a role, the insistence on this false idea is in itself a main determinant of insufficient innovation within the state apparatus. In sum, we need not only that policymakers invest in skills, change the incentives, promote new organizational practices that are aligned with an innovative public sector. We need them to use their political leadership to shape a public image and a self-image of the public sector that fosters the need for institutional changes. This is, we have to be aware of this is a great and courageous leap for most political leaders, especially in countries with fragile public finances and where bashing the public sector, bashing civil servants is often an easy way to obtain some of the needed savings in public expenditures. The problem, of course, is that the short-term gains lead to significant losses in the long run. We need far-sighted leaders to produce the changes that are needed. We know that they do not abound, but hopefully there will be some of those within us, at least from time to time. This is what I wanted to say today, and I hope that it will be useful for fostering some reflection and debate on this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Muito obrigado. Thank you for your words. It was an excellent reflection on the role of governments and public administrations in addressing the global challenges we all face nowadays. I would like also to thank Sofia Ribeiro from the Instituto Nacional de Reabilitação for having this job to translate our event to the Portuguese Sign Language. So thank you very much, Sofia. Now, let's take a peek to what others are doing outside Portugal, and to do it, we have an excellent panel with very distinguished guests from organizations that have different roles in this innovation ecosystem. We were very sorry, but one of our speakers, Professor Fernando Martin, was unable to attend. He has a medical issue early this morning. He's fine, but he couldn't attend to our session today. So let me introduce to our other speakers that will bring an excellent panel to our event. So Brenton Caffin, the Executive Director of States of Change. Welcome. Welcome also to Elsa Pilichowski, Director for Public Governments from OECD. Thank you also to João Vasconcelos, he's a Senior Governance Specialist in GovTech from World Bank. And last but not least, Vitor Fazio, Coordinator of 011 Lab, the Laboratory of Innovation in Government from the Municipal Secretary of Innovation and Technology from São Paulo, Brazil. So thank you all again for having accepted our invitation. And to moderate this conversation, we have the experience of Jorge Eusébio, a journalist from Lusa. During this session, all the attendees will be able to use the chat to leave questions that will be answered at the end of our event. And with no more delongs, Jorge Eusébio, please, the floor is yours. You can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Bom dia. So, Jorge Lagarde has already introduced our excellent panel. I would just like to stress that although Fernando Martin couldn't attend today, he's not forgotten, because I can confess that on the other day he stressed the need to talk about the role of the pandemic in this digital and innovation in the public sector, that after all, we're all here talking in a webinar, also because of the pandemic. So not forgetting him, I would just like to start precisely with the issue of the pandemic, with Elsa Pilichowski. Of course, has an immense experience in the OECD, spanning not only in the organization but also in other countries, and has this global view of different experiences in different countries. So, Director for Public Governance in the OECD, Elsa Pilichowski, what can you say to us about the role of the pandemic, and what the institution of the OECD and other and what reaction did you see from other countries reacting to the pandemic and to the needs to innovate in the public sector during this year and a half or so that we are living in this pandemic? You're muted, sorry.
Yes, thank you. You see, innovation doesn't get to age. I still need to be reminded of unmuting myself 18 months after the beginning. But good morning to all, and thank you very much for the invitation. Very inspiring speeches from the minister and from Ricardo before. So just to rebound a little bit on the pandemic. I mean, over the last year and a half, governments have really unleashed, I would say, a torrent of innovation at a pace and scale not seen in generations. I mean, to fight the pandemic, moving to teleworking, promoting distance learning, creating new online services. To just give a few examples, and we've heard over the past year and a half that, you know, services that were addressing a few 100,000 citizens were moved up to tens of millions of citizens, in some cases very fast, in a few months. So it's quite amazing what has been going on in the public sector. I think it's probably the first time since the Second World War, at least, that the innovation, the speed of innovation in public service has gone so fast. So, I mean, amazing achievements. On the other hand, we know that much of the public sector innovation is still needed to tackle the big challenges that are coming tomorrow or even today. And I can think, of two main ones. The first one is despite, and that is very much linked to what Ricardo was mentioning in introduction about the self-fulfilling prophecy, about governments not being said not to innovate and then not innovating because it creates a culture of lack of innovation. So the first challenge that we see is really about reinforcing democracy. Only 51% of people in OECD countries trusted their governments in 2020, and this is also after a small spike in trust in government. And we know that it's decreasing now. It's appearing to be decreasing in OECD countries. Of course, there's disinformation that fuels distrust in democratic institutions, and for example, in 2019, only 41% of OECD countries had a framework or policies or tools in place to address this challenge. So in the face of a big challenge like disinformation and its enormous impact on society, on trust in institutions and on the future of societies, governments were actually slow to innovate. Much more is needed, we know, to reinforce democracy in terms of innovation for engaging with citizens, better evidence for policy design, closer decision making. I mean, all these would benefit very, very strongly from innovation. Second big challenge, engaging the whole of government in the climate transition. We're all witnessing a devastating effect of climate change, the dramatic flooding in Germany and of course Belgium. Yet we see today that 83% of recovery funds so far do not consider environmental dimensions or have environmentally negative effects. I mean, so green governance to green society and to green governments require a fundamental shift in policy making across the board, which will not be achieved without the power of innovation. So basically, when you look at the two, what we would consider as the two biggest threats to societies being held together today, democracy and climate change, governments have not been innovating fast enough. So we saw in the COVID crisis that there is a capacity to adjust very fast, but there is a need for forecast, for taking innovation seriously when meeting such big challenges. So just a few words, the good news, there is a very good news. First is that they have innovated, and second is that today there's really an opportunity to accelerate innovation by making use of the enormous recovery effort being underway. OECD countries have provided about 16% of GDP in additional spending or foregone revenues to businesses and citizens, and up to 10.5% of GDP via other measures. I mean, this is unmatched in recent history. So you ask what we are doing in the OECD. In my directorate, the Public Governance Directorate, we've created a division dedicated specifically to promoting open, digital and innovative governments, to help governments think through and work through issues like this. We have the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation, which serves as a global forum for public sector innovation, helping really governments to understand, test, and really embed new ways of doing things. We're in the middle, I would say, of exploration and standard setting. So we are constantly scanning from new experiments and approaches that may have significant potential impact for governments. We're tracking innovation trends, analyzing and sharing promising COVID-19 responses, trying to help governments understand and pilot emerging technology solutions, experimenting new methods such as anticipatory innovation. And on standard setting, we're basically positioned to convene an ecosystem of actors together to build consensus around key aspects of public sector innovation. And for example, we have 43 countries that have adhered to the OECD Declaration on Public Sector Innovation, which basically establishes key principles and actions for governments to enhance innovation. So that's it for your question. I hope it answers what you asked for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before passing the ball to the other panelists here, I would like to ask Vitor, João, and Brenton to turn their cameras on so we can see all each other. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Helsa Piliszowski has stressed the issue of democracy, and also during this pandemic, we have an environment of restrictions and to limit our freedoms, and the role of the state has been very, very powerful all over the world. And I would like to invite Brenton Caffin to comment on this, taking into account that he has advised the Australian and British government, and he should know something about this. And it's also a view from the private sector, which is interesting as a dynamic for our conversation. To how do private firms see this and try to adapt to the pandemic and to not to limit our freedoms and in their relations with the state.
Thank you, George. Yes, so States of Change actually is a not-for-profit. We're not a private sector organization. We're a charity, and we were set up specifically with this purpose of helping to support the next generation of public innovation around the world. And yes, I've worked very closely with the British and the Australian governments at different levels. I've also worked with lots of other different countries around the world, including helping with LabX over the years. So great to be back in this company, and indeed with Sao Paulo as well, and in fact with the OECD. So it's good to be back with some familiar faces. Maybe I might expand a little bit on some of the things that Elsa said, because I do think there are some very interesting sort of themes that we're seeing emerge in these last 18 months that I think are grounds for optimism about how we can sort of work more effectively, state and citizens. So it's not all Big Brother. I think actually there are some really fascinating experiments in sort of co-production of public value outcomes. It's not just the state telling people what to do, it's actually collaboration between citizens and the state that I think are probably we're in a different place than we were a few years ago. So a piece of research that we did working with Climate Kick in the EU was looking at specifically what can we learn from the pandemic. What can we learn about the way government's behaving differently that we might be able to use for working on the climate transition, as Elsa mentioned? And we saw a number of really positive things emerging, some of which we've touched on. Governments are being far more agile, far more experimental. They are digitizing services far more quickly and rapidly, and the adoption is growing much quicker than we would have ever expected. And the speed at which we're moving services online, whether it's telehealth or online learning, is very, very quick. I think there's a second set of innovations around governance. I think I think this audience is probably very data literate, but I think the average citizen has become far more literate in interpreting official statistics and data, and probably checks data much more frequently and changes their behavior as a result of what they're seeing in official statistics. So we're in a way, we're sort of having much more data-driven governance and data-driven conversations between the states and citizens. We're justifying the choices we're making about what we're doing in terms of our restrictions because of what the data is telling us. And that's a very transparent conversation, or certainly a more transparent conversation than is often the case when we decide policy. In a sense, we're inviting citizens into the sort of the data sets that we're using to inform our decisions. And I think that goes to a third point around governance, which has been the very, very important need to preserve and to strengthen trust. And you know, obviously the pandemic has been a great experiment in very, very good examples and some not so good examples. But you know, using data and transparency to try and foster trust, because we are asking citizens to undertake behaviors that are well outside the norms of what we're used to in terms of our personal freedoms. And you can only do that if you can see the logic and the rationale of the policy choices that are being made. And so that sort of speaks, I guess, maybe to the last set, which is around some of the policy shifts that we're seeing that we think are worth bottling from the pandemic, ready for use on the climate transition. I think the first is this idea of being able to have a fresh conversation about the social contract. What does it mean to be a citizen? What can we expect from our state? And what does the state ask from us in return? I think we are in a very plastic moment where that conversation can be revisited, I think, from first principles. I think, you know, if we'd asked people not to drive their cars every second day to reduce pollution 2 years ago, you know, that would have seemed a bit far-fetched. But I think now we could ask people to plan their travel a bit more and maybe they'd be more accepting of that. I'm just making that up as a frivolous example. So I think there is a very rich conversation to be had about what the social contract needs to be as we move through the climate transition. I think we're having a very different conversation about public finance and about what needs to be done to invest to support these transitions. The pandemic has shown that when the need is great enough, we can find the money. We just haven't chosen to find the money for many, many crises. Now that we have shown that we have that capability, I think what will be really interesting is what that then means for the choices we make about long-term investment in transitions. And finally, and this might be a strange one, but I think that there is a different conversation to be had around care and what is the role of care in society and how do we value care? I think we've been very, very strong on economic growth and on employment. And sometimes that has come at the cost of people investing in their communities and in their families and relationships. I think the pandemic has shown us the importance of these social bonds of connection, the need to look out for neighbours and our neighbourhoods. And I think that will also be something that will stand us in good stead for when we start to think about what it means for us to sort of transform our societies to be less carbon than using less carbon than we do today. So there are some of the things we're seeing at this moment. I can talk a little bit more about what we're doing at States of Change, maybe if I have another intervention.
Yeah, sure. We will have time for that. Not that much time, but we will find time for that. I would like now to, because Brenton has stressed a few topics that we'll have to talk about here, but the first one that comes to mind, and I'll ask João Ricardo now to intervene, is about data protection, because when the citizen has to accept that trade-off between data and protection, and to what extent does the citizen allow that to happen? And I would like to ask João Ricardo about this, and what kind of experience João Ricardo has, because João Ricardo has worked in Portugal, now works in the World Bank, has of course a background of different sensibilities towards and knowledge towards different environments of data protection. How far can we go as a society, as world, in data protection and in allowing our personal data to get treated by governance, and of course the privacy issues that come to mind. We have recent scandals involving that. How far are we willing to go in that matter?
Okay, So thanks a lot, Jorge. Let me thank, first of all, the invitation from LabEx, from Mama. My compliments to the minister, to Ricardo, and also here to my colleagues, panelists, namely to Elsa, my former director at the OECD. I think the question that you make, it's super relevant. Because, and picking also on other interventions that were made, governments were at the forefront of response to COVID in different areas, and the role of public governance was made very clear, I think, for everybody in more developed and in developing countries, and mostly. There was also a kind of big acknowledgement that was already underway, but the reinforcement of an acknowledgement about the role of technologies, about the role of digital, on the capacity of governments to respond to governments and economies and societies at all to respond to COVID, and mostly. I think this was also a big message that we heard more and more, this willingness to build back better, meaning not trying to just reproduce what existed previously, but trying to build back better, addressing topics like we're mentioning here by Elsa, by Brenton, so the convergence between the digital and the green transition, for instance. So how can we think about digital without thinking about green, and vice versa. So this kind of conversion of agendas, issues of also of cohesion between different segments and societies. And here I could highlight, I don't know, topics like gender, race, other things that came up, and the role of data also on managing this kind of sensibilities. But I would bring, and considering your question, George, mostly to the topic of democracy, that was also highlighted by Elsa and Brenton, and digital democracy, and what are really the digital rights of citizens nowadays, and how the pandemic also changed a lot our perceptions about it. When you consider digital rights, they are what we can call different layers or different generations of digital rights. I would say that the first generation is more focused, as you mentioned, George, on issues of data protection, the basics really of what a citizen can count to enter in the digital age, the right to communicate digitally with the public sector, cybersecurity, so really the foundations about it. But what we've been seeing is that this digital rights, namely towards the government, have been evolving a lot, namely when we do this shift from what we call the e-government to a digital government perspective. So right now, citizens expect, and this was also highlighted by Minister and also Ricardo, a government that is more efficient, that is capable to respond to their needs in a much more seamless way. The rise of one-stop shops everywhere, the demand from the citizens not to provide the same information twice to the public sector. So that's what I would call a second generation of digital rights. As a third generation, and this is becoming more and more also a reality, is when we dive in what we call data-driven economies, data-driven public sectors, and even touching other topics like data-driven companies, surveillance capitalism, you name it. So there are several things here to be considered. The role of AI, algorithms, what can the citizens do about it? If there is one word, of course, that we can and we could observe in different economies and different societies, is the relevance of trust, like it was mentioned by Brenton. So in societies where you have already reasonable levels of trust in the government, namely in the public sector, the capacity or the flexibility of the citizens to, in a certain way, allow that for the reasons of the pandemic, their data can be used in different ways in pro of a society. So this happens a lot. So societies with big or higher levels of trust respond better to what we are seeing right now. In societies, of course, where the levels of trust were already threatened in some way, I think the pandemic was unfortunately the cherry on top of a bad cake that made and are bringing is bringing up several issues that are coming more and more as problematic in this area. And for having trust in the way that the government uses your data, the economy is also, but here it's about a debate about public sector innovations, about government. You need to have mostly what we call data ownership. That is, the capacity of the citizen to know what the government is doing with their data, for what, when they do it, so have full transparency about it. And there are different countries that have been evolving more and more on this. So the capacity of a citizen, and this we can provide examples of from Estonia, from Belgium, and other countries that invested on this possibility of a citizen knowing if somebody or if the tax administration is looking at my data, I know, and I know the reason why it is doing that, or the health administration is doing so. This provides me ownership about it, and this gives me also the capacity to let the government better manage my data. But if there is also something that I think it could be relevant, and I would like also to bring to the table here, is the capacity of the governments to really bring the citizens on board on the way that on their policy-making processes, on the way that they design services. So making the citizens, it's a little bit what we call a shift between citizens, being citizen-centered to being really citizen-driven. So the capacity of bringing the citizens on board and partner with citizens, with civil society, when you develop solutions, namely responding to the pandemic or others. So this kind of partnership can reinforce trust, can reinforce the ownership also of the citizens regarding the solutions that are being provided, and can also generate what we can call the kind of shared responsibility about the responses that are being made. So the way that the government also operates in a certain way as a government, as a platform, so providing solutions, bringing the citizens on board, partnering with citizens, can make all the difference here. I would have several other topics to address, but I'll stay here and hope to intervene following my other colleagues. Thank you.
Yeah, time is flying, and now we're going to fly to São Paulo to talk to Vitor Cipriano de Fazio. Vitor, I think João stressed here some points of the ownership of the citizens of this process, and I think it's very interesting to ask you how is this working at the local level more than a central government level, because of your experience in São Paulo. How do you see the reaction of the public at the local level to what you have been implementing in São Paulo, and also, of course, during this pandemic?
Good morning, everyone. Good evening to Brenton. We are in the opposite sides of the world, and I really wanted to have this courage to come here with a T-shirt. I admire that. That brave, you are very brave, and we are needing this bravery at these moments. And we need to be more informal also, and to build these bonds to work together on changing how we do government, and we do democracy and all these themes. I'm in a really tough position here, George, because I'm very curious about lots of the other issues that Brenton, João, and Elsa pointed out. I want to make questions. I want to interact, but I also have to answer your question. And as I'm dealing here with the nitty-gritty daily problems of a city with 12 million people and capacity problems and huge inequality problems and etc. I think I have an imperative to talk a little bit about that. So it's very good to be a public servant. There's a lot of people passionate about being a public servant and about doing what we do here, doing with these nitty-gritty problems of interacting with people and trying to cope with problems and do what we can to make people's life better, to deliver better services, and to transform a reality. As George said, there are many reasons why people are working in government. Normally, they are very good reasons. We are people with purpose. So we have to build, we have to transform using this as a driver. Well, what we are doing here and what how we are dealing with these changes and these challenges. We basically have as a lab, we have this agenda of building organizational capacities. So we talk a lot about public management, about public policies, and less about methods, innovation, and this stuff. We are working on concrete things to show with people what can be changed. How does it work? How does it feel to work differently? To try to learn what we do, to try to learn with people when we deliver the service, and to test, to experiment these different ways of doing. And it's been a very interesting journey. We are learning a lot about how to do public management in a different way and how to be more resilient and how to adapt. And it's a lot about building capacities while we do deliver, and people are in the center of this process. They are the organization. So there's no change, no viable change if we don't put people in the center of this process of transforming government. And it's amazing. We are still, I'm in a position I can say that we are still discovering in many ways what we are doing and how we are doing some stuff. And States of Change have been a good partner of us and making sense of that. We're experimenting a lot of stuff here. And that's my watch. It's very early here. And I won't be able to find it. So, okay. LabX have been a very good partner too. We're exploring some agendas that, for instance, the plain language agenda in Portuguese, it's something new. And I know you are in English-speaking countries, many of you, and it's a 10 years discussion now, but it's something new to us. And it's something, it's a fundamental agenda if you want to reduce the distance between government and people. We have to speak the languages. We have to be understood, to speak to be understood. So, well, there are many things in this process that are interesting that could be shared, but basically we are trying to develop new ways to do public management, to understand what is that of delivering services, to learn what we do, what are the processes we have to develop, what are the capacities we are developing while we are working. How do we use knowledge? How do we use the practice of others in order to solve problems? And that's interesting. That's something like we are trying to be designers while we work, to make use of knowledge, to adapt practices in order to solve problems. That's what we do. At the same time, we are also trying to engage communities of practice, of public servants, to connect each other in order they can learn with each other. This week, and it's something very concrete. We are working this project with State of Change, developing and connecting different teams from different departments on digitization. We are making digital services. Okay, this is something quite trivial, right? No, we have different realities, different levels of capacity, different agendas, and putting these people together is very interesting. So they can learn with each other. What do we have to learn from what someone from the human rights department has to learn with the people from the health services? We discovered that they have a lot to learn with each other, because they are doing with very not standard, something not easy to make standards of, like very customized services. Like it's something complex. You need to learn about the person you are attending, their needs, and then try to deal with that in a very sensible way, to connect the services you have to provide, your catalog, and at the same time trying to discover what is really the problem with that person. This is complex, but we have the cases here. Like we're delivering health services in communities, going door to door, and we developed these processes. So that's it. That's a learning journey. It's interesting. It's complex, and it's very good to be a public servant at this moment. And okay. I see Jorge wants to interrupt me, and please do that. We agreed on that.
Yeah, I was not going to interrupt you, but we have to pass to another topics of conversation, because you stressed that, of course, that local dimension and concrete projects that you are implementing, and Brenton has before stressed the issue of money. We need money to do this. We need money, and of course we have here organizations like the OECD and the World Bank that know a lot about public finances, and of course we have stressed the importance of green investment, and the question, and I would like, of course, you to be brief. We have approximately 10 minutes to because we need to open for questions of the public. Is it the time for a massive public investment at all levels in digitalization and public service innovation? Because what are the consequences of not doing it now? And we've seen that the pandemic has showed us the importance of all this. So I'll just start with Elsa again, do the round again.
So the question is it the time for massive investment?
Yes, and what are the consequences of not doing it now?
I mean, governments do not really have a choice. First, they are investing massively, so they are spending massively, and in all likelihood, we will not be able to continue that for 20 years. So at one point, this will have to stop. So it's really the time for investing in public innovation. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that. Second, I also mentioned the democracy imperative and the climate imperative, and that also has a timing on them, on both of them. The consequences of not investing And I think it's also been said by other speakers here in terms of democratic innovation, whatever we call this thing, and trust. The consequences can be absolutely huge. We don't know what societies will be living in 20 years, but certainly the investment in trust in public administration is a good investment to make now, as well as climate. Just on the money issue, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because money is, of course, something. And we tend to consider the costs of what we call the production costs of government. That is not the cost of investment in the economy, but the cost of government functioning as something lost for society. This is a narrative on which we need to work, including at the OECD. This is something that we need to sell to citizens as well. It's not lost money for society when we invest in government functioning, but that's almost a separate issue. Now I would like to mention two challenges very briefly, because I think money is an issue, but there are two other big challenges in terms of the functioning of government. One is really a complexity, in the sense that the challenges that we're meeting, whether it's climate, democracy, etc., are hugely complex issues that require governments to function across departments, etc., and they do not yet have the tools to do that. So innovating within a silo today is almost irrelevant. The second one is really innovation across borders. We have seen during the COVID crisis governments innovating very, very fast, but almost alone on exactly the same things, whether it's a COVID app, whether it's procurement mechanisms that had to be done upgraded very fast, whether it's on digital services, etc. So there is an opportunity to innovate for governments to innovate together, and that will help also with the costs. Obviously, it will be less costly if it's done at a more regional or global level. We're trying to help at the OECD. We're trying to help with that. We would love to be able to launch a platform for governments to innovate together on the same projects, if you want, rather than alone in their own areas, because the challenges, many of the big challenges that are coming up, like COVID, will be same challenges, will be exactly similar challenges. Not all. I mean, I think Vitor has a very concrete job in terms of local, but at the more global level, there are many, many challenges that can be thought together and in governments innovating together. And I think this global innovation landscape is not yet up to standards. It's not yet up to what we should be expecting. So that's it.
Thank you very much. So, Brenton, what do we need to elevate our standards, as Elsa was saying?
Goodness me, and I'll try to be brief. I think, just to build on what Elsa said, there's going to be a lot of spending that happens over the next 5-10 years. We need to make sure that spending is actually investment, and investment means there's a return, right? There's some value that we get out of it. It's not just money that just gets spent and it's poor spending. So I think there's something there. I think that's the opportunity in the public innovation space, is to help to direct that spending to areas where we will unlock public value. So that's one thought. And another, I also agree that while it's great to have innovation flourish in every corner of the world, we do need to try and learn from one another, and that's part of what States of Change was set up to do, as well as the observatory at the OECD. And I think in some respects, the pandemic, while in some instances has isolated us, it's also brought us closer together, because actually we're all working on a common challenge that's manifesting in slightly different ways in different parts of the world, but we all do need to build an app, a COVID app, and we all do need to work out how best to kind of communicate to our public about sort of, good public health precautions. So it's a very interesting moment of common humanity that I think that we should be really using this opportunity to learn from. And I know there is appetite there. We ran a learning festival last year just to ask our community, what should we be doing as public innovators in this moment? And we had 4,000 people from 78 countries turn up to join us in the conversation, which was about 3,500 more than we thought we would get. So clearly there is thirst, there is appetite. I think there is willingness. I think it's up for institutions like ours, like the OECD and others, to help to keep developing those protocols for sharing and swapping. One of our fellows, Sasha Hasselmeyer, set up an organization called CityMart, which is actually designed to get local governments around the world sharing procurement challenges. So if someone was designing a procurement in one city and somebody else had the similar problem, they could basically just join in on that and procure the same result. So I think thinking about that kind of intermediary infrastructure, I think, will be how we get away from lonely innovation.
João Ricardo, the World Bank works with many countries around the world and with different levels of technological advance. And how do we innovate in these different kind of technological sensibilities that have to do with geography, with economics, with all this, and how will we find money in, for instance, countries with poor public finances, as Ricardo Paz-Mamed was saying before?
Okay, so thanks for that, and thanks, George, for highlighting the relevance also of when we have this kind of debate, thinking about not only in the, let's say, the developed world, but also in the developing world, that, as you know, is facing tremendous challenges, and where, as you also mentioned, George, the state has a critical role, but the capacity of the state or of the government to react and to have the right tools depends a lot on several dimensions. I would highlight one, that is international cooperation for development. And here it's really an area that, of course, the World Bank has been working, and it's the core area of the bank to work. You cannot, in terms of technology, so cooperation for development is absolutely critical at this moment. There are some signs underway. The bank is pushing to see this happening more and more, from vaccines to transfer of technologies and other issues. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution when you talk about technology. So what works in one country, like Brazil, might not work in a country like Cabo Verde, in terms of thinking just about dimension or others. So you need to build on the knowledge of other countries to try to adapt those solutions to your own context. And that's, I think, it's the critical issue. Let me highlight, if I could, on this. You need, and to promote digitalization, and you need to promote public sector innovation, two critical partners here, and that should be always on your playbook. The first partner is, of course, your civil servants. So if you want to innovate, what best experts you can find that within your civil servant community. If you want to improve your health sector, who are the experts, your experts in the health sector? On the services of your health sectors, on taxes, on social security. So bring your civil servants on board on this process of innovation, because they will know for sure the strengths, but also the weaknesses of your process, and they will be the first ones, because we have civil servants like Victor, and let me pick on you, Victor. There are a lot, and so we need to have this kind of strengths to where governments can build on. The second partner, for sure, for this public sector innovation effort is, of course, bringing again your citizens, or let's talk broadly, your ecosystem of stakeholders on board, and to make this ecosystem to collaborate, to be part of the solution. Not only when you design services, when you bring your citizens, but when you're trying to develop solutions, different kind of solutions, mobilize the willingness and the expertise of your NGOs, of your companies, So try to get the best of each one of the stakeholders that you have around you. And again, I think if this is important in developed context, let's call it like this, in developing countries, it's absolutely critical. And I'll state here.
Okay, so very briefly, before we open up to questions from the public, Vitor, we are almost talking about taxpayer money, if not all money. It's some big part of it, it's taxpayer money. And in local contexts, we see that the reaction from the public is very, very direct. We can have that direct contact, how people react to the concrete investments that we do. You were talking about the health sector, for example. How do you see the importance of good financing? Because you deal with public with a very, very specific context and direct context. People do notice this, and it's the people that are paying us to do this kind of job.
That's an interesting question, because in this panel we are both discussing these more teleological or agenda questions like democracy and how do we use the generosity and the intelligence and ways of doing things of this moment to make further transformation. But we also have to discuss the practical means to make this come out to light, to transform the reality. And money is part of that. It's your resources. Yeah. There is we're living a budget restriction for many reasons. People can feel that. People are acting in a different way when they are evaluating publicly what governments are doing locally. So we have been able to sense that, but at the same time, as public managers, as public servants, we are always scanning ways on how to build the practical means to deliver services. So there are many different ways to get these resources, not only budgetary ways. So we have been working with the whole ecosystem, with the non-profit sector, with foundations. There is a growing and a thriving group of organizations of non-profits in Brazil. They are working with on improving how the public sector works and delivers. So the ecosystem has been a very important part on developing these practical means to transform government. So in a very, very brief way, I would say that we're trying to join forces, and we are developing the instruments and the intelligence on how to do that in local governments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We'll now open for questions from the public. I believe I'll pass the ball to Jorge Lagarde to hear what the public has to ask. Thank you very much, Vitor, Brenton, Elsa, and Jorge Lagarde. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. We are facing some issues with the chat tool, but I have one very important question that I'm struggling to not answering myself, because it's somehow what we do here in Portugal. But we have a question here for Brenton and Vitor. Is from Pedro Falcão, and he is wondering if you can provide practical examples how to involve citizens in designing innovative public services. So I don't know, each one of you wants to step in.
I'll be very brief. I'm also conscious of time, George, but one project we did a number of years ago, which I've got a link ready to send, so Pedro can have a look at that at his leisure, was around designing services for families, particularly those who are at risk of having children removed from their families and put into state care. And we worked over 9 months to understand what families needed to thrive, to do well, and they engaged with the process of designing the solution that we came up with, which was ultimately about creating a family mentoring relationship. We called it family by family, and in a sense the families coached one another to help them through some difficult times and work on their development goals. So the role of the public servant, if you like, or the system, was to facilitate, to orchestrate, to bring these people together, and then to step back. And that's what I mean by sort of co-production. It's not just asking them what they think they would like, it's actually engaging them in the process of achieving the outcomes that we want to see in our societies. So I might pause there. I'll put a link through, and hopefully that gives you some more food for thought.
I will actually do the same, Brenton. Pedro, I put the link of a publication we have with some few curated cases on what we did in co-production of services and co-production of solutions with citizens. There are many things, many different ways of doing that in different kinds of contexts. So you have a better answer looking at this set of cases. We work very passionately to deliver these cases and to curate them. And we also have a program here called Copy and Paste, CopiCola, and we do this knowledge management work, and specifically trying to build these guides on how to reproduce stuff, how to use this knowledge to solve problems in other contexts. We have already produced 17 of these cases, and they are all from our reality here in São Paulo. So maybe there are many useful stuff there. They're in Portuguese, so you can I'll put the link here also, so you can go to the webpage, see these guides, see these practices, and see if there's something that can help you on co-produce public services with citizens.
Thank you, Vitor. I also want to invite Pedro to see LabEx's website, and you can find it many examples of involving citizens in co-production and co-creation, and even in research. I have a last question, probably to João Ricardo and to Elsa. It's something about digital literacy of the citizens. How can we promote this digital literacy to help to respond to the challenges that there are nowadays in these movements of democracy, in participatory democracy? Is this an issue to have a little digital literacy with our citizens, or how can we moving on and to tackle this challenge?
Elsa, you want to go first? Yeah, or
yes, I can go first. Very briefly. Yes, I mean it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, digital literacy. So there are different ways of entering this game. One is through education, so it's kids education. Another one is adult, which is different, and another one yet is basically the intermediation that civil society or government can do between what is, for example, what the information is available and and how to package it for citizens. And I was talking about misinformation a little bit earlier, and of course, digital literacy is a big issue there. But we're seeing a lot of civil society stepping in, either media or other civil society organizations trying to debunk a little bit the information, rebunk, as we say it in the crowd, so that the information available, so that even if citizens are not able themselves and do not have the literacy to actually make that difference and to step in the internet with the right level of competency at the beginning, it is compensated by this extra effort by intermediaries, if you want. It is totally insufficient for now, totally insufficient for sure. But I would say there are really 3 ways of intervening, because the challenge is too huge for digital literacy to catch up very fast with the challenges today. It will take probably decades and generational change as well. But the challenges are huge today, so we need to make up for that weakness. That's for me.
Okay. Thank you. João?
And on this, and complementing a little bit the answer, I think in our days we tend to think that since the world is going digital, everybody's already digital, and that's not the case. And I could provide you a lot of examples where even in more developed countries, you need to make sure that there are all the segments of the population are involved in this transformation. It's not just, you cannot leave nobody behind. And that's why, and probably I'm touching here a different issue. When countries try to develop their digitalization policies and the digitalization of their service delivery, countries need to have this in mind and always need to secure what we call omni-channel service delivery approach. That is, it's good, it's excellent, it's fundamental that you can have today the full service delivery process digitalized, but the way that you deliver services, you need to make sure that nobody's left behind. That's why make the coexistence between online, face-to-face, telephone, postal, intermediate service service delivery with intermediaries, and here the Portuguese example is particularly interesting with the citizen shops, the citizen spots, and others. I think that's one of the ways that we also need to tackle the issue of digital literacy and realizing that again, the literacy of citizens is progressing, but it will still take some time, and governments need to be aware of that and consider it in their policies.
Thank you very much, João. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you to all the participants. And that's it. We are running out of time. We could stay and chat for more 2 or 3 hours, because this is a very interesting topics that we have addressed today. So I would like to thank again everyone, your participation, your excellent participations, and thanks particularly George for moderating and Sofia Figueiredo for the translation, and to everyone. Vitor, you can now have your breakfast, and Brenton can go to rest, because tomorrow I guess it's a working day, so even in Australia you have to work every day, so thank you very much to everyone. Muito obrigado a todos. Nós, na próxima semana, vamos ter uma sessão mais íntima com a nossa rede de inovadores. Vamos apresentar os resultados do programa de micromobilidade, o Inovador em Residência. Tivemos 3 colegas do setor público a trabalhar connosco durante o mês e vamos apresentar estes resultados. Agradecer também à Sra. Ministra Alexandra Leitão, que ainda mantém-se connosco. Muito obrigado. E é tudo. Até uma próxima. See you all next time. Thank you very much. And that's it.
Obrigado.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Tchau, gente.